Hi, you're watching Doggy Musings, and I'm Monika, and today I'm going to be doing a book review of the book Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. So, I was drawn to this book because Obama talked about this as being one of his favorite books of the year. And I also went to an author talk where the author talked about her mentee, who also was Eleanor Catton, and talked endlessly about how awesome this novel was. So I wanted to see what all the hype was, and so I picked it up this summer, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on it. But first, who is Eleanor Catton? So I will attach the video in the notes below, but I watched this really cool video about her and kind of her inspirations on writing this book. Besides political manifestos and the bookshops that she used to visit, Catton also was inspired and influenced by Hamlet, which you can tell by the title Birnam Wood, as well as Jane Austen, specifically the form of Austen's novel Emma, which she talks about the idea of no description and purely narration. And Catton also thought it would be interesting to do that format and that formula and that narrative style as a tragedy. Can I say that word? As a tragedy instead of as a comedy. So I thought those inspirations were really interesting in kind of thinking about the interpretation and analysis of her work. So what is Birnam Wood? So Birnam Wood follows these kind of guerrilla farmers who play Robin Hood in their New Zealand town. So they'll go into these rich billionaire homes. Usually they're vacation homes that these millionaires don't use. And they will go into these residences, plant crops, and then distribute these crops to the community. However, this group, called Birnam Wood, is coming into a crossroads of their time as a kind of sort of nonprofit. So some of the people of the group want the group to become bigger and to actually reach nonprofit status, whereas other members of the group want them to keep staying as their small kind of rogue mission statement is. However, when a kind of rich and scary billionaire with his own past comes into the picture with a wacky opportunity, will an opportunity actually turn into a tragedy, and who can you trust? That is the story of Birnam Wood. What were the cons of this book? So I will say that while analyzing this book, it was really interesting to kind of think about the Austenian references that Catton has, especially when thinking about form. However, I will say that the narrative style at some times took me out. Because of the lack of description, the telling not showing, it was really hard sometimes for me to connect with the book as a reader. I think it might have just been user error. It was really hard to get into because of the timing of when I read the book. So I read this book during the middle of a move, and I think because of how the format of the book was, it wasn't as immersive, and I don't mean that as a curt or demeaning way, but I think just because of how the formatting was and because I was in a stressful time, it was very difficult for me as a reader to get connected, at least in the beginning of the book, into the rhythm of her book. So what were the pros? So I will say that all the hype surrounding the twists and the turns of this novel are very real. By the end of this book, I was fully engrossed and had no idea where the book was going to go, and that was very exciting. For her writing style, purely being narration, this actually was helpful in kind of gaining the motivations of each character, and also kind of helped play up the unreliable narrator and kind of the distrust that each of the characters have also plays into the distrust that the readers end up having by the end of the novel for each of the characters. All in all, it was a really fun literary study, especially when thinking about the references that Catton has, which I know is a nerdy thing to say, but hey, you're watching book 2, so. And I also think that if I had the opportunity to listen to this book as an audiobook, as opposed to reading a physical copy, maybe I might have gotten into this book a little quicker. I think that the way that it's written, I think might even, at least for me, have lended itself better to kind of a narrative and audio style. Alright, so I will spare you read-alikes because I talked about kind of Catton's literary inspirations. So instead I will talk to you about watch-alikes. One watch-alike in specific, which is the show Succession. I'll talk a little bit about what Succession is, because maybe you don't know. Although you're watching this, I'm sure that you consume way too much media like me, and so you know what Succession is if you haven't watched it already. But anyway, Succession follows a family of very rich, unlikable people who center around this main character who is the father, who owns this huge unnamed media corporation that is kind of taking over the universe. And he is at a point in his life where he kind of has to think about who his successor is. That's the name of the show. And each of his kids has their own unique reason for why they want the company. And of course, each of their reasons is selfish. And it definitely has some King Lear-esque vibes. And I think that the Shakespearean vibes, as well as like the twists and turns and the reality and morality questions that play themselves in Succession, also play themselves in Eleanor Catton's book, Birnam Wood. I think for me, as a reader, as well as a watcher of both of these pieces of media, I found myself, and maybe this is a hot take, feeling equally disconnected at times watching Succession as I did watching Birnam Wood. But when I got to the twists and the turns, those were the parts that drew me in. Now, twists and turns, is that all that a good thriller is good for? I don't know. Maybe that's a question for a different video. But I will say that it makes for an entertaining read and watch. And so, with that, I will say, if you want to read a book that keeps you guessing and keeps you on the edge of the seat, you might want to think about picking up Birnam Wood. If you want something that you can feel fully engrossed with right away, take it or leave it. Anyway, this has been Dog Ear Musings. I'm Monica.